Aside from the specific issues as to who makes the bracha of Shehecheyanu, there is the overall question, the placement of this incident into Masechet Pesachim. And while it is true that the first instance of the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben and Pidyon of the Bechor of animals is linked to Pesach, in that the obligation to redeem the Bechor is first recorded in Shmot Perek Yud Bet, the Perek dealing with Korban Pesach. Nevertheless, a more appropriate placement of this incident would have been in the Masechet of Bechorot, Perek Chet, that discusses the halachot of Pidyon Haben. The Rashbam, grandson of Rashi, attempts to justify the placement of this incident into Masechet Pesachim in that it follows a pattern and situation that is quite similar. One that is recorded in the final Mishnah of Masechet Pesachim that discusses the brachot that are to be said for the Korban Pesach and the Korban Chagigah. Of the 6 symbols that are placed upon the Seder plate, 2 represent the Korbanot that were brought on Chag HaPesach. One was the Korban Pesach, symbolized in the shank bone or an alternative part of the animal, the meat of which was to be roasted, as was the case with the Korban Pesach, and Minhag Chabad is to then strip the meat away from the bone, and the Korban Chagigas, a korban that was brought on each of the Shalosh Regalim. The Beitzah, the egg, on the Seder plate is symbolic of the Korban Chagigah. In the days of the Beit HaMikdash, these were 2 separate obligations, and as such, a specific bracha was to be recited when one consumed the Korban Pesach and upon the consumption of the Korban Chagigah. The Mishnah discusses when one eats the meat of the Korban Pesach together with the meat of the Korban Chagigah, whether one is required to recite a bracha for the Korban Chagigah. This, of course, is not just an issue of brachot, it's an issue of priorities. Nowadays, for example, when one makes hamotzi for the eating of bread, that bracha incorporates and includes everything that is to be consumed in the meal, the soup, the meat, the dessert, etc. And as the priority lies with the Korban Pesach, Rabbi Yishmael argues that Beirach Birchat HaPesach, if one had made the bracha prior to the consumption of the Korban Pesach meat, Pataret Shel Zevach, that bracha incorporates and includes the meat from the Korban Chagigah. The reverse, however, is not the case. If one had made a bracha on the Korban Chagigah, that would not include the Korban Pesach, and a separate bracha would need to be made. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Yishmael and maintains 2 korbanot are 2 distinct mitzvot. They are not interrelated, other than the fact that they are brought on Chag HaPesach, and therefore the bracha for the Korban Pesach does not incorporate the Korban Chagigah. Lo zo poteret et zo, v'lo zo poteret et zo. In the case of the Mishnah, although we are dealing with 2 separate mitzvot, they are nevertheless linked by the fact that the individual brings both of the korbanot, and on account of this linkage, there is room to argue that the bracha of one might automatically incorporate the other. Rabbi Yishmael argues it does. Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Similarly, suggests the Rashbam, we have a situation with respect to the bracha of Shehecheyanu at a Pidyon Haben, where we have a single event, the Pidyon Haben, the participation of 2 people, the parent and the Kohen, and the existence of 2 brachot, the bracha of Shehecheyanu and the bracha of Pidyon Haben. And herein is the link. In both situations we have a single event with 2 components. In the Mishnah it is Chag HaPesach with 2 korbanot. In the case of Pidyon Haben, the 2 components here would be the parent and the Kohen, each mounting a theoretical argument that the bracha of Shehecheyanu is theirs, the parent on account of the fact that they are performing a mitzvah, the Kohen on account of the fact that he wishes to express thanks for receiving the 5 slaim.